What's up, everybody? This is Jason Ostrowski, and welcome to another edition of the Everything Real Estate Podcast. We've seen it for what seems like forever that there is such a lack of inventory out there and lack of listings that we have right now. So I wanted to switch things up today and talk about listing presentations, because I feel like when we do get an opportunity to get a listing right now, we really need to maximize our efforts and give us the best chance to win that listing. So I thought about who could we have come on today who I really admire and look up to when it comes to listing presentations and how they go about their business. And Jeff Macdonell from our Yardley and Newtown home marketing centers, he is the sales leader there. He has a fantastic sales presentation that he has put together. And Jeff is an outside of the box thinker. He thinks about things that I think no other agent thinks about and can express those in a succinct manner and can really help your business. So I wanted to have Jeff on today to speak about listing presentations and seller objections. And I think you'll find particular value in this episode for those of you that are heading on listing appointments this spring market. So let's get into it with Jeff Macdonell about listing presentations and seller objections, and we'll talk on the other side. All right, so I am here with Jeff Macdonell from our Yardley and Newtown offices, and today we're going to talk about something that is extremely relevant to every agent's business right now, and that is listing presentations. And listing presentations can make or break you as an agent, and we all know that listings perpetuate your business in a way that is sustaining. So we thought, with the market that we're in, who can we talk to that is kind of an expert on listing presentations? And Jeff is one of the smartest people that I've ever met. And anytime that I was around Jeff, I always felt like Jeff was on another level and everybody else was kind of under him in terms of his insights on real estate and his creativity to solutions that he would find for real estate. Jeff, I'm not saying this because you're just in front of me. I just want to
Wow. Are you sure you have the right person on?
a brilliant real estate mind, Jeff Macdonell. So, Jeff, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Jay?
I'm good. It's good to see you again. I feel like it's been a really long time. So,
It has been.
yeah, I'm glad we could sync up a little bit. So I want to dive right into it because, this market is crazy. And especially for the lack of listings is just something that I think a lot of us have never seen before. And so listing presentations are that much more at a premium. When you go out, you want to win that listing for your business. So in your mind, right off the bat, what makes for a good listing presentation in the environment that we're in right now?
So the listing presentation itself, so that's sort of after you've already gotten the opportunity to go in and talk to somebody. So I really think the number one thing is to control the meeting.
Okay.
I think a lot of sellers, when you walk in their front door, they have the idea that they're going to take you on a tour of the house. And in my view, that immediately hands over control to the seller. And I would prefer, even if they sort of insist, I would prefer to ask them, where are we going to sit, so I can put my stuff down. And as I sort of am putting my things down, I'll say, do you mind if we sit for a minute and chat before we tour the house? And 100% of the time people will say, sure, let's sit down for a minute. I like to start by controlling the meeting with questions. And I come right out and say, listen, we're here to talk about your goals and what this house means to you in moving forward in your future. So the house is the subject of it, but ultimately I'm here to help you achieve your goals.
Yeah, and I think one of the first things that I always do in a listing presentation is, regardless of whether you're bringing, paper with you, if you're sending a digital listing presentation, if you're sending a pre-listing presentation to your client, I always bring out the notepad and the pen, and so they know that I'm paying attention and that I am there to write down what they're saying for the questions that I'm asking. So it seems like you're doing that.
I agree. In fact, I'll draw attention to the fact that I'm going to be taking notes by asking them permission. Do you mind if I take some notes?
Absolutely. Okay, so you take some notes, you have a conversation for a little while, and where do you go from there? Because like you had mentioned, a lot of agents will start off taking a tour of the house. So do you kind of reverse that? Do you start off with the presentation itself after you ask some questions, or where do you go from there after you take some notes and kind of get the story and background from the seller?
So I think that the sit down conversation and the note taking is extremely important because the more questions that I ask, I think the more value I'm providing to them. I'm making them think about things maybe they hadn't thought of before. Maybe I'm standing out against another agent that they've already talked to by asking really deep questions. But what I'm also looking for are answers to questions that I can sort of use later in the conversation when it comes to price or it comes to timing, things like that, because sometimes I can find a contradiction.
Hmm.
And so I don't, that's one of the reasons why I don't like to tour the house first. I want to know who's sitting in front of me, what their motivation is, what their personality type is, because I think the worst thing you can do is go through a pat listing or a pat listing presentation. You don't want to start from A and go to Z. You want to figure out who's in front of you and pull out what you think is going to be most valuable to them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think personalizing things in this environment is key because, like you said, you want to differentiate yourself from everybody else that's out there. And speaking of differentiating, one of the things that, at least personally in my business, is within the past couple years, I went to an all digital listing presentation as opposed to bringing, a paper with me. And so, do you see many agents doing a similar thing, especially during COVID? Some people are wary or were wary when we first started out about having paper products that were handled by multiple people. Do you see people switching over to digital presentations, or do you see the tried and true, binder that you're going to see people bring out with them?
I think it depends on the audience. I think that you have to present in a way that's going to be best received by the audience. But I definitely see more people doing the digital presentation. And I'm a big fan. People ask me a lot of times, do you do a one-step or a two-step listing presentation?
That was my next question, by the way.
Okay, good. Um, I'm kind of a fan of the one step. But
Okay.
what I also do is I send a pre-listing email. I'm a big fan of Active Pipe. So I like to send out an Active Pipe email ahead of time and I embed some videos and I request that they watch the videos because they're going to be important for our meeting. So I'll include videos like AdWorks, digital home marketing system, number one stories, transaction rooms, depending on what I think will be of most interest to this particular client. And then, of course, with ActivePipe, I can see whether or not they actually opened it before the appointment. So it gives me a little bit of a heads up.
Yeah, that that's such a great idea. I didn't think about doing, say, Active Pipe ahead of time. I do have the AdWorks video like in my listing presentation when I go out. I do find it interesting that you're also a fan of the one step. And there's no right or wrong here. I just want to preface that for every agent out there. For me, I always find that it's the time between the call and the appointment will determine a lot of times what I do in terms of the one step or the two step. I always do like to send them something ahead of time to your point, what you were saying. But I may send them, a pre-listing presentation with a little background on me, maybe a couple testimonials, and then a little bit about what I do to kind of tease the situation. And then and then when I go out to the actual presentation itself, I bring, my marketing plan and everything else with me. But I love the use of Active Pipe there. With the one and the two step, do you find, just anecdotally from what you see for your agents, do you find your agents doing more of the two step as opposed to one step, or is it kind of a mix of both that you see out there?
I think it's kind of a mixed bag, but I do a listings workshop several times a year just to constantly create more confidence in the listing presentation process. Um, I think the goal, I always try to impart the goal being one step. but of course, it's not always possible. If people are interviewing other people or they're still early in the game, they may not be ready to sign. But the mental goal is one step. And if you're going to do a one step, you have to be prepared for a range. So I'm going to go in thinking this is the range in that I think that this property is going to be. Where it falls in that range is going to be what I see when I get there, as well as the motivation and the intentions of the client. That's going to play into where we position the house price wise.
Yeah, I always try and give a range of price. And in this market, we see sellers wanting to shoot for the moon a lot, right? And in the back of your mind, and you may say this flat out to the client, that I have deep concerns about the home appraising at that price in this environment. So let's shoot for the lower end of that range, and hope that we get multiple offers and drive that price up. Do you feel like that's a good strategy to employ in this environment?
I think that the public thinks they're going to get, the stars when it comes to price right now. So I like to provide a little extra value by having a strategy price wise. For instance, I like to address the fact that, and I call it this old school. It's old school to price high and seesaw your way to the middle. I think buyers have too much information now. They understand value more than they ever did before. So I like to talk about market position. It's kind of a Jackie Leavenworth thing as opposed to price, because if you want to price your house, say at 605, to me, you're missing everybody looking up to 600,000 by going $5,000 over. And maybe that's your buyer. I also don't like 599 because you're missing everybody looking between 6 and 700,000 by $1,000, and it would be great to capture people at the low end of their price range.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're priced, I like those even ceilings and floors, 100,000s and 50,000s.
Yeah, in Ninja, the concept is called bridging, and that's the concept that we always used. And just to reiterate what you were saying, like someone who's searching from, say, 600 to 650 may not, or may not see the home if the home is priced at 599. And someone searching from 599 to 600 will see it. So that way, if you price it at 600, you're getting both segments of that market, and then they come out to see it. Yeah, I think that's a great strategy, to employ. I do see out in the field right now, the ground shifting so fast underneath our feet in terms of pricing, and appraisers are always trying to catch up to those prices right now. And sometimes seems to work out and sometimes it doesn't. But like you said, I think both buyers and sellers have maybe too much information. I mean, maybe that's not the right word, but they see what's out there and they think that they're market experts. And especially from the seller side, Zillow is still out there and always looming for a listing presentation. So one of the objections that you may get is, I see my house on Zillow, it's worth X. What do you say to those sellers that kind of anchor to that position, to, whatever AVM they're looking at? Whatever they can hang their hat on, they seem to hang their hat on, even though it's not realistic. What do you say to those sellers?
I would say that there's always a disparity between any automatic or automated valuation system. So if you pull up 3 automated valuation systems, they're all going to come up with different prices. I like to look at the accuracy chart. Zillow has an accuracy chart for our area. So I might want to bring that with me if I think that this is going to be an objection. I also like to focus on the value of an agent too, and the value of an experience. And I've sort of said tongue in cheek, Mr. Zillow's never been to your house. So it's kind of hard to determine value based on an algorithm.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And, I tend to say the same thing because those charts that you reference, I think in our area, if I can remember correctly, typically they're all 3 to 6%, depending where you are in the Philly metro area. Do you find, and I kind of go back and forth on this because you'll find certain people or experts in our industry that may say during a listing appointment, "Are you interviewing other agents?" I always found that to be something I didn't do because I felt like if I did my job correctly, I did the best job that I could do. That, the majority of the time I'm going to win out on that listing presentation. Do you recommend that something to your agents to recommend to ask if they're interviewing other agents?
So I don't come out and ask, but I allude to it. And I might say something like, if you're interviewing other agents, here are some questions you might want to ask.
That's great.
So I'm providing them with value by giving them some talking points. I'm showing that I'm not threatened by the fact that they're talking to other agents. And I think that confidence goes a long way.
Yeah, absolutely. Along the lines of confidence, what do you see out there with agents, just in general? What mistake or what one mistake or pet peeve maybe do you have about agents doing a listing presentation? What do you think the most common error is that agents make in a listing presentation?
The most common is not being prepared enough. I think when it comes to a listing presentation, more is more.
Mhm.
You don't know who you're going to be sitting across from in terms of a personality. Some people want to talk and tell stories. Some people want to see statistics. You need to be prepared for anybody. Um, I also think that, I'm very focused on conversion rate. So, don't leave anything to chance. If there's any way that you can secure this listing, you should be prepared to do it. Brian Buffini says out of 10 listing appointments, there's 2 you're going to get no matter what. 3 you're not going to get no matter what. And that leaves 5 up for grabs. So I'm always playing to those 5 that are up for grabs to make sure that I'm closing any gap possible. So I think people are necessarily not prepared enough to show value. And the second thing I think is kind of in this particular market, people get very afraid of the commission conversation. And I like to address the commission conversation by the fact, I try to acknowledge the fact that the seller most likely thinks our job is to find them a buyer. And I like to dispel that right away. My biggest job is not to find you a buyer. I could probably stand outside on the street in a chicken suit and find one by waving people into the house. That is not why you're hiring me. So I like to go into the value of the pitfalls, fall throughs, the reason why things fall through, things that we can do and strategies that we can employ to make a contract solid for them to get the most amount possible. Because most sellers on their own, you see people on Facebook right now asking the question, do I even need a realtor right now? Well, absolutely, probably more than ever. How are you going to decipher 20 offers? You're going to pick the highest price. And it's just not that simple.
That's an excellent answer. And I just want to say for the record, you keep stealing my questions, so stop. I'm gonna have nothing left to ask you, Jeff. No, I think when it comes to the commission thing, you and I were talking, before we started here, that you know, like you said, we can have buyers lined up around the corner, but it's the work in preparation and then the work in negotiation that we may do together that's gonna make me worth my salt. I do think in general the commission objection is always for agents the hardest one to overcome because people start to panic, and they're quick to give away their value. What else would you suggest when a seller says, you know what, Johnny come lately down the street will do it for 4%,
Mhm.
which is, I'm not getting into commissions here, but I'm just saying everybody has to work for a living and we should express our value. So, what do you say to that person, that will always do it for less? Let's put it that way.
So let me start by saying, let's assume that I've already provided an impressive amount of value before we get to the listings, or I'm sorry, the commission conversation. So that's another thing about being prepared, sending them things ahead of time, and really showing them things that they weren't expecting. I think statistics is another really, really valuable thing that you can get out of agent metrics, supply and demand, as well as median sale price over a 2-year rolling period, I think is an extremely important visual. So when it comes to the comparative argument, I'm comparing you to somebody else, they're basically treating you like a commodity. They think you're the same as somebody else. So I actually enjoy a lengthy conversation about commission. And if I have somebody that is just not buying into it, I'll say, do you realize that for the last 20 minutes that we've been speaking about commission, you've allowed me the opportunity to audition the biggest skill that you're hiring me for?
Mm.
And if you're comparing me to somebody else who in 3 seconds didn't even argue about their own value and their cost for service, who do you think would be the better person to provide you with a strategy and negotiate on your behalf to get you the most for your house? Because we're really only talking about a small amount of money when it comes to the commission difference.
Hmm. And that's the one thing that's always fascinating to me, is that we don't talk enough about our negotiation skills and what that means to a deal, because ultimately the goal is to get you the highest price in the shortest amount of time, right? And I feel like when it comes to negotiation, we do need to do a better job of expressing that in our listing presentations and talk about it and not be afraid to talk about it, and have the verbiage to be able to express what you want to express ahead of time. And as far as preparation goes, I just have an anecdote. I have a friend in the business that I'm very good friends with, and I laugh because every listing that she gets is like a friend of hers, and she feels like, and I don't mean to embarrass her, but she feels like it's in the bag. And I always tell her, do not take anything for granted, because I know for me, the hardest clients that I have are actually friends and family, because I feel like if I don't know somebody, there's the professional side of me, right? That people know, and that's what they see. But when it's friends and family, they know you from way back when. They know you as a kid. They know you to be a certain way. And now all of a sudden those roles change, So I always struggled with that type of person. But to your point, never take anything for granted out there, because you never know. You hear stories all the time about agents assuming that they're going to get a family member's listing, and they don't, and then they're very angry about it.
So I
So
talked about preparation before.
yeah.
I gave my sister a listing presentation and she's like, what are you doing? You got the job. And I said, it's really important for me that you see the professional side of me 100%, because I don't want you to doubt anything during the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I listed a very good friend's house last year, right before COVID. It was quite an expensive house. Um, and although we're friends, they're professionals, I'm professional, and we had a very lengthy conversation about commission. And ultimately, this is sort of my thing that I pull out at the end. If I can't get them at 6%, I'll say, listen, I showed you all of our marketing materials. I showed you how all roads lead back to me as the listing agent. So it's not unlikely that I may bring you the buyer. In the event that I bring you the buyer and there's no other agent involved, I will happily reduce the commission to 5%, and I'll write that in the contract right now. And most people will agree to that. And in this particular case, they did agree to that. But the commission really sort of stuck in the craw of Mr. Seller in this particular case. We went through a very difficult sale, and in the end, they got $150,000 above the appraisal.
Wow.
And when he looked at the net sheet, actually the Alta sheet right before settlement, and he looked at the amount of commission that I was getting, he said, do you keep all of this? And I said, no. I split that with my company. The advertising and marketing expenses came out of my portion as well, mostly. And he said, you should get all of it. So it's really interesting how people assume in the beginning they're negotiating something that they still have no idea about. And in the end, they saw the value because they just didn't know it ahead of time.
Yeah, I had a client this past year where I've done multiple deals with him. I've sold I think at least 3 properties of his. I sold a property of his brother's, and they've all been investment properties, and they've done 1031 exchanges, and there's tenant issues, and I remember him saying to me at the end of our last transaction, he said, you know what? He said, if ever I thought that there was an issue with, commissions and what you guys get paid, he said, I don't think you guys get paid enough for what you guys deal with because they see the process. You and
Unfortunately, that happens after you've negotiated your
yeah, that's
commission.
true.
So
Sure.
I really think that one of the areas that agents really need to pay more attention to is negotiation training and skills. And I know everybody hates the idea of role playing, but I always go back to the old adage, thank God doctors practice on dead people. Why do we practice on our clients?
Mhm.
You can have all the right answers to the questions, but if you look like a deer in the headlights when you're saying it, it's not going to have the right impact. You need to be polished and practiced. Your confidence needs to come through, because ultimately they're hiring you to be the project manager of this situation. And if you're going to manage this process for them and this project, they need to have confidence in your ability, and they will pay for that confidence most of the time. Most people don't hire the cheapest contractor. They hire the one with the most value. So it's our job on the listing presentation to show as much value as we possibly can. And most times we're up against other agents who walked in with a few comps, thinking that it's in the bag, or they just weren't prepared enough. So more is more when it comes to preparation.
I love the language that you use there, and it's so true. I mean, don't let anybody outwork you, because or be more prepared than you, because in the end you only have yourself to blame. If you can go into that listing appointment knowing that you did the best job that you possibly did, then let the chips fall where they may. You know what I
How
mean?
hard do you work to get the appointment?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
what I always go back to.
so,
We
yeah,
spend so much time and energy prospecting to get that appointment. You should be so polished when you get in there. And I know people bring up commission and we automatically get sweaty armpits, but we have to be able to confidently work through that and show our value.
absolutely. So, all right, so I want to circle back and I want to talk about the listing presentation itself. Now, you mentioned agent metrics. For me, agent metrics is my absolute favorite to go, my go-to, because I do the pricing analysis on there. I love the charts and the graphs that I can show and explain, because I feel like people usually are visual learners. And so the more that they can see on paper, the easier I think it is for them to understand if you explain it correctly. So let's just talk about the tools of a presentation. So you mentioned agent metrics. Is there something else that you incorporate into your presentation itself?
Well, part of agent metrics is market share. I like to bring 3 different market share reports that I'm prepared to duplicate live in front of them. If I know that I'm up against a particular company, I can include them manually in that market share report to show them the difference in how many buyers we're attracting and how many sellers we're servicing. So I love the market share reports. The other thing is, um, I'm a big fan of marked up comps. So all the comps that I might include in a Moxie presentation, I'm going to have a printout with all the photos from Bright. And I'm going to spend some time and I'm going to do the history on all the comps. How much did these people pay for the house originally? Um, looking specifically at sold comps, how much did they pay and how much did they sell for? How many price reductions did they have? Um, I'll make notes on acreage, whether or not it has a pool, how many garage spaces. If I've been in the property before and shown it, I might put my personal opinion on certain things. But the idea is you're not just handing them some paper comps, you're handing them work. You've put work into this, you've done your homework, and you're giving them some insight.
Hmm. I always like to use the and I always print out the pictures of the properties, but I love the client 3-up too, from Bright, because that's your side by side comparison. Now you can incorporate that Moxie in your digital presentation. Moxie has something to that effect too, kind of what we call the client 3-up. It's the side by side comparison of every property and its square footage and bedrooms and bathrooms, acreage, and all that good stuff. Um, you can also create pages in Moxie. And one thing that I love about that is that I can create some custom content for me. So I may have a page about me. I may have, like I had mentioned before, some testimonials about me. It has my branded look that I have, my logo is on there. Um, but the one thing that I always am fearful of, and maybe you can speak to this, is that you can have so many pages between, the company literature, your own stuff, agent metrics, if you wanted to incorporate RPR into something, or so, other pages. Do you try and keep your listing presentation to a certain amount of pages? Let's put it that way.
The digital version, yes.
Okay.
But even if I give a digital presentation, I still like to leave them with something. And I like to leave them with a lot.
Okay.
I like that perfect bound Moxie presentation to be thick. Um, I also like to give them samples, like you said, of testimonials, but also samples of property brochures. I give them things like the anti-fraud brochure. I even have a document where I've blown up the inclusions paragraph of the agreement of sale.
Mm-hmm.
So I prep them ahead of time that when you eventually enter into an agreement of sale, be really clear that these are all the things that are included, because some of that's an eye opener for them. They wouldn't even have thought about some of that stuff. I also include the seller safety checklist from the NAR safety course. There's a lot of very good information in there. Don't leave photos of your children or your calendar on the refrigerator. Somebody coming into your house might see your schedule for the week. These are things that provide value that they've never thought of before. And that's really my goal.
Mm-hmm.
I like to give them, like I said, the anti-fraud brochure. I bring the brochure on transaction rooms. I talk about fraud and how prolific that is in our environment and what we do to protect them. Because that also speaks to, I don't think other agents are necessarily talking about that. So that's a differentiator. I like the Trident brochures. I think just showing them that we have partners behind us, that even though it's a listing, we have people that we can talk to help decipher complicated financing, title issues that may come up. I also do Bucks County Associate. I work mostly in Bucks County, and Bucks County Assessor's Office. You can go on there and get a sketch of the property and print it out right from their website. So I show up with actually a blueprint of their property.
That's awesome. That's really cool.
And again, more is more. But when it comes to the Moxie presentation that either I send ahead of time or that I present them in person, it's not everything but the kitchen sink. I leave the rest of that stuff in person.
Okay. All right. So that, and I wanted to add on to what you said. One thing that I love to bring also is if there's a UNO in that township, you can go on Suburban Realtor Alliance and you get the UNO checklist. And that will have, the township and if you're in Pennsylvania, I should qualify that. And that will have the checklist that repairs potentially may be made by the seller prior to settlement. You may have to have the township inspector out. So bring that information with you as well. Utility information is something that I bring too. What are your utilities? What's your costs? We're trying to get an overview of the home. So a utility sheet would potentially work well as well. And then also I just want to make mention of, I don't know if Jeff, if you incorporate these, but in ACE, if you go to the value creation specialist folder, there are many items that you can incorporate into your listing presentation, discovering the unique story about your property. That has some great questions on it. There's a calendar in there so you can kind of map out your desired closing date. There's all kinds of information in there that I try and incorporate as well. I don't know if you do the same, Jeff.
I use the calendar. I think that that's really important, especially to add some perspective to people, that if they think they want to move in September, so they're going to put their house on the market in July, it's a really good visual to sort of back them up into doing things sooner. I also am a big fan of the "and what else" question. I like to really dig deep with people and get them thinking, because sometimes you'll have two decision makers at the table. When you ask the right questions, they actually find that they're in conflict with each other. And it would be really nice to know that ahead of time. Um, so just sort of digressing a little bit back to those questions. And the reason why and then moving forward again, the reason why I like to do the Moxie presentation uh, digitally and also leave them with a lot of materials is I like them to have something to refer to when they're talking about me after I leave.
Yep. Yep. And so following up with, all right, so let's say you leave and following up, do you write the seller a handwritten note? Do you
Absolutely.
thank them in any way? Because I think that's very important. Speaking of differentiating yourself from somebody else.
I'll write it in my car before I leave.
Yep.
I don't want to forget anything. I just want to make sure it's done. I don't want to forget to do it. So I think if you get in the habit of when you get back in your car, take 5 minutes and write the note and mail it out the next day.
Yeah, I think that is such a key that people miss because you follow up maybe in a couple days, maybe you'll give them a call, but a handwritten note, you know that the majority of agents that are going out to that property are not doing that. So I think it's vitally important to do that as well. And also, I just one last thing. I mean, this is off topic, but I've gotten listings for different reasons, and it's not always about your presentation, right? Showing up and giving your professional best, right? Make sure that you're dressed appropriately. I think that sometimes, like you had said, Jeff, sometimes people just bring a couple comps and that's it. Make sure that you're giving it your all, because it reflects on you as an agent and it reflects on your business. So I would just say always give it your professional best. So anyway.
In addition to that, somebody told me a very long time ago, when people answer the door, take a step back. It's very disarming to people when you initially take a step back before you walk in. When you do walk in, always offer to take off your shoes, no matter what. It's just courtesy. And most times people will say, no, not a problem, but you're starting off on the right foot.
And also, I think along those lines, like don't cross your arms. That's known to be a defensive posture. If you lean into people, people tend to that's kind of like an inviting posture. So
Mhm.
there's all these different things, not to, have paralysis by analysis the next time you're out on a listing appointment. You're thinking of all these things, but I think all these small things add to, your whole presentation, from your body language to, your tone and the mirroring effect. That's also a big one too. You want to try and mirror what your client is doing. If they're animated, then you be animated. If they're more reserved, maybe you tone it down a little bit, So do you find yourself doing that at all or no?
Absolutely. It's interesting when you mentioned body language. I'm thinking back to a listing presentation I went on several years ago where the wife called me in and the husband had already decided on somebody else. So he sat through the presentation with his arms folded. And when I got to the seller safety checklist, because I noticed they had a calendar on their refrigerator, um, I said, for instance, if I were somebody with bad intentions who was coming in looking at your house, I would know your entire schedule for the month. Um, his arms unfolded at that point, so I knew that I had just hit something that interested him. So not only your own body language, but paying attention to theirs too is pretty important. Um, the other thing, mirroring. Some people, you can tell they want to hear a story. And so if they're anecdotal, you be anecdotal. If they're all about the statistics, you be about the statistics. But the one thing that I have to really urge people is not to me market. Me marketing is a thing of the past. People don't want to be sold to. We're sold every place we turn in our lives. And this has to be everything that you show them and you talk about has to be about how it's going to benefit them. Can't be, I'm the best, you should use me because. Here, it should be, here's what I can do for you, and here's the tools I'm going to use to do it, and here's why it works. And the market share reports are so important in saying, see, it clearly works, what we're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. Jeff, I could I could talk about this all day with you, the fine arts of listing presentations. I think we would bore probably 99% of the population to death. For those of you listening out there, I hope this provided value to, to your business. Jeff has some really excellent ideas on here, and Jeff, I'm sure we'll be catching up soon, but I just want to thank you for joining me today. It's always good to see you, and always, good to pick your brain for a little while.
Well, I appreciate you asking me, and I'm just going to put a little thing out there. If anybody wants to email me, I'm happy to send them my listings workshop outline. That's a lot of good information in it.
That's great. And so, it's just jeff.macdonell@foxroach.com.
That's it.
All right, Jeff. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jay.
It was great talking to Jeff, and we thank him for his time today. Wow, he had some really good stuff in there. And my biggest takeaway from what Jeff was saying is, preparation is key. When you have an opportunity to get a listing appointment, like Jeff said, more is more. So always come prepared, because you never know what type of personality style that you're dealing with, whether it's, someone that's outgoing, that's a promoter, if you have a power personality or an analytical personality, you are prepared for each of those things. Another thing that Jeff likes to do is he switches it up. He does not take a tour of the house first. I found that to be interesting. He likes to sit down and kind of build that rapport with the client before they go any further, and use that as kind of a differentiator from himself compared to other agents that they might be interviewing. It's all about finding the pain and the pleasure with sellers out there, right? And also identifying the decision maker as well. Jeff kind of alludes to that, sometimes people aren't on the same page. It's always about finding out different things about that seller, and then kind of tailoring your presentation to what they want. The last thing I gathered from the interview was, you have to be confident. And anytime that you go on a listing appointment, and confidence plays such a key role in how you come off to the seller. And so in order to be confident, you really do have to have a strong presentation, and you have to practice. You have to be ready for any scenario that may come down the pike for you. And sometimes, that's experience over a number of years, but there is preparation that you can do in advance to help yourself and give yourself the best chance when you're out on a listing appointment. And last thing, I know I said last before, but last thing is always write a note after you're done. Write a note to the seller, send that out right away like Jeff and I were talking about. That will go a long way with the seller as well. For those of you heading out on a listing appointment this week, I wish you the best of luck. Join us in a couple weeks from now. We'll have a new topic, a new guest as always. And if you want to hear something in particular that I haven't covered yet, reach out to me, jason.ostrowski@foxroach.com. And for those of you that are avid listeners and enjoy the podcast, please help us by writing a review wherever you get your podcasts. We always appreciate you listening. So until next time, stay safe out there, stay selling, and we'll catch you on the next Everything Real Estate podcast.